Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the Alliance for Community Media Northeast workshop on license renewals, transfers, and other regulatory opportunities, which is pretty wide open, broad heading. At law firm of Epstein and August LLP in Boston, and I see many colleagues and friends. Great to see everyone. And we, as you know, concentrate in cable franchising, Access Corporation, and media center work, and related regulatory work. I think this very prominent and expert panel needs no introduction, but allow me to introduce our panelists. Sue Buskey, the president of the Buskey Group, as most of you know, is a nationally recognized expert in franchising and nonprofit media center and Access Corporation work. Mike Wassenaar, the president of the Alliance for Community Media, and the previously an executive director of the St. Paul Neighborhood Network. Is that the exact right name of the organization? And Jim Horwood, longtime counsel to the Alliance for Community Media, and also legal counsel to scores, if not hundreds, of municipalities and access corporations, and also a mentor and advisor and friend to anyone who's been active in working in this area. So very excited to have such a panel together. I would say Mike Wassenaar, Sue Buskey, and Jim Horwood have I just wanted to jot down a few words in my appreciation of their work. Have all been great leaders in the cause of community media, public access, and promoting First Amendment values, democracy, and community through access. So I say we give our panelists by way of brief overview, the subject matter of the workshop is just as the title really outlines, to cover cable franchise renewal process, cable franchise transfers, opportunities to support PEG access through state government regulation and state government oversight, regulatory update, as there have been so many significant federal and state law developments, and then any other miscellaneous hot cable topics. We will take questions from the audience after the presentations and also during the presentations, subject to the discretion of the panelists in terms of how the frequency of questions during the actual presentation. And before turning it over to Sue Buskey, who's going to just want to also give a few very brief but very sincere thank yous. Especially I wanted to thank the folks at Alliance for Community Media and Alliance for Community Northeast, the Alliance for Community Media Northeast for holding this conference, and in particular to Pua Ford, who at every imaginable turn was so responsive to providing us with information we needed about various logistics and actual substantive subjects in terms of what's going on in cable through her involvement in these areas, and also to the Deb Rogers and Karen Davis, leadership at ACM, who have been really extremely helpful on this. So without further ado, Sue Buskey will start off with discussion of franchise renewal, transfers, and the rest of the segment.
Thanks very much.
Okay. Good.
So, you're going to hit me on the head or tap me on the shoulder if I talk too long. So I'm going to try to give you a 30,000-foot overview of a lot of things in a fairly short period of time. I know that you're probably going to have questions, so fire away. I'll try to answer them as we go along. I wanted to start out with an outline, and we're going to start out by dealing with franchise renewal. And there's some key things that as you enter the 36-month window, that's the window of time when a cable operator needs to give the local franchising authority the notice that they want their license/franchise renewed. You ought to be ahead of the curve. You need to know what's involved in the renewal process. You already need to know a lot about what your community needs are and what the things that are not available that you need right now. So you need to build a renewal team. And what I found, at least in dealing with some of the communities I deal with in Massachusetts, is a lot of times it's not the town or the city, it's the community media center. It's actually the entity that's out ahead of the curve on trying to educate people about franchise and license renewal. But I've also found that sometimes the folks in the community media center are really knowledgeable about access and about producing programming and about operating a community media center, but they don't necessarily know all the details with regard to what the legal process is for franchise renewal and what are the things that are happening elsewhere, not only in the state but across the country with regard to dealing with Comcast or Charter or whatever. So one of the things I want to start out by saying is you all are the leaders in your community, particularly those in Massachusetts and many of the states in the Northeast region. It really hasn't been the city or the town that's in many cases taken a leadership, although there's exceptions to that. And that's really unusual as compared to other states. If you're in Minnesota, it's going to where there's still local franchising authority. It's going to be the city or town that's going to kind of be, or the joint powers authority if it's multiple jurisdictions, that's going to be out ahead of the curve, or it should be ahead of the curve. But they're going to be the one that the cable company is contacting, and they're going to be the one that starts to initiate any kind of preparation for going into the renewal process. But in the Northeast states, a lot of times it is a community media center. So build an educated renewal team, really critical. You need to be briefing city staff or town council members with regard to renewal, particularly if you're in a smaller community. You need to be ahead of the curve. You need to understand what the renewal process is. You need to determine information that is needed both from a community media center perspective, but also from a customer service perspective. And you need to determine how either you or the town are going to be gathering information to get ready for the negotiation process. Now, just the facts. Everything is up for grabs. One of the things I found is that people think, well, we've got our franchise fees and we're getting 4% or 4.5%, and we've got 4 channels, and we're just building off that. No. Technically, under the renewal process, it's flush it all down the toilet and start all over again. You need to be aware of this. Now, those of you in Massachusetts in particular haven't had until just recently companies coming in and saying, we're maybe not going to give you what you had before. But that is starting to happen. Now, it's a reality in a lot of other states, but you guys, because Massachusetts is in a really unique situation with regard to license and franchise renewal, because of things that are unique in the state and state law and administration, haven't dealt with it. But it is happening now, and it's starting to happen in Massachusetts. So you need to be aware that you just can't assume you're going to get what you have now and build up. Okay. Secondly, the franchise is really valuable to the cable operator. And this little math formula up here is something that really, a lot of times, wakes your elected officials up. I've used a formula of $91 a subscriber a month to represent just the cable part of the bill and not the internet or the telephony part. That's a conservative number. You take that number times 12 months times 10 years, and in a 5,000 subscriber system, a little system, that's $54.6 million. That's the value of the contract to the cable operator, just for the cable part. If you add the internet and telephony on top of that, you're going to minimally double it. So in a city with only 5,000 subscribers, we're talking about over $100 million. That's the value of the franchise, the Comcast or charter. And those kinds of numbers begin to wake up your elected officials. If they think, oh, we don't have to do any needs assessment, we don't have to do any compliance review, we can just sort of go in there and sit down and figure out, okay, we want this and just negotiate. That's why negotiations can get rough and tumble. And a lot of people simply do not look at these numbers like this. And they really do make a difference to elected officials. It could be one of the biggest contracts that they'll be negotiating in the next 5 to 10 years, is the value of this contract to the cable operator. Remember, the franchise is about negotiating rent for the use of the right-of-way. The cable operator is using the public easements, that's valuable and limited public property, and what you're negotiating in a renewal process is what they're going to provide back to the community in exchange for having access to that limited public asset. And that comes in the form of franchise fees, the license fees, the high definition channels, the EPG for pay, all the sort of the links for pay connections, all of those things are part of the package that's rent for the use of the right of way. So remembering the value of that contract to the cable operator and emphasizing it when you're dealing with your elected officials is really important thing. Now, I'm not going to go through every one of the bullet points here because this is basically the sort of Cliff Notes version of the federal franchise renewal process. I think most of you are pretty familiar with that already. I think the key thing here, however, is, and I'm going to back up for 1 second, is it has to do with what you need to do to get ready to sit down in negotiations. I was just talking to some folks a couple of months ago from some smaller communities in Massachusetts, and they said, well, our franchise renewal window's open and we're going to sit down and start to negotiate. I'm going, well, have you done your homework? Has anybody done any needs assessment? Have you done any focus groups? Have you done any process to gather information about what not only your current needs, but your future needs might be? Well, no, we're just going to sit down and negotiate. I said, talk about handing the cable operator a gift on a golden platter. All right, if you not build a legal case for what you're asking for, the company's going to know that. So that's why doing your due diligence, which is a performance review and community input needs assessment, becomes absolutely critical to what comes out the other end of the renewal process. So let me just click down here. These are some of the things that one might do in performance review audit. A franchise or license fee review. I can quote one of the things that happened when we helped out with Cambridge when they did the renewal process a couple of years ago. We ended up finding a little over $1 million in underpaid franchise and franchise fees. And that was part of a combination between the franchise fee review and the compliance review. This is why, and I'm not saying everybody's going to find that every time, but you need to understand that it is something to look at. Also, I just recently heard of some conversations about narrowing the definition of what can go into what we call the gross revenue basket, which is the number from which one computes the 5% or whatever. Okay, if you've got a nice broad definition, you don't want that to change. So please take a look at understanding that the franchise review is probably one of the most important compliance things you could do every year. Okay, as far as the compliance part, it's very good to do a compliance audit. And it's actually pretty easy. If you just take a look at what's in the franchise and look at what I call the deliverables, what they're supposed to do, you can make a list. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. You take a table, and this is the deliverable, and this is a section citation, what it is, yes, no. So it's actually pretty straightforward to do a compliance review, even if you don't have the resources to have somebody help you. You can still create that table and start to look at whether the company has actually done what they were supposed to do. Or maybe they have, and if they have, wonderful. But maybe they haven't. And if they have not complied with the current franchise agreement or license agreement, then that needs to come into play in the renewal process, whether you deal with remedying that non-compliance issue prior to negotiations, or you use it as one of the negotiating tools in your tool belt. So these are some of the things to think about. Needs assessment is another area. And in the needs assessment area, I've laid out a number of tasks. You can do focus groups, online surveys, telephone surveys, stakeholder meetings, relatively familiar with many of these sorts of things. But don't just do one grand public hearing and things are done, because that's one of the things I see happen a lot. You really need to do some of these other things, whether you do them on your own or you get help doing them. It really is very important, and that's part of the due diligence I was talking about. So here are a few factoids, okay? Now I wanted to put those out, and then we'll go to talk a little bit about the transfer process. How am I doing? Okay, let's say 10. Okay. All right, so I wanted to give you some of this statistical information here because I think it's useful because it emphasizes the importance of doing the due diligence, of doing the assessments, whether it's home surveys or whatever. And this is some facts. Some 10 recent online surveys we've done. We found 60% of the subscribers, this is the average of the 10, subscribe to HD. 35% of them said they rarely or never watch anything that's not HD. What does that tell us about what should be in the franchise agreement? Okay, but you have to have this data. Right. And if you just assume, you have nothing to back it up. Okay. And what I've done here now is laid out a few of the places where we have paid, where the pay channels have HD. By the way, this PowerPoint is on my website, so you can download it at mustygroup.com. It's up there right now. That's why I didn't bring copies of it.
What's the site?
That's mustygroup, buskegroup.com.
Thank you.
And I also think that the region is going to make some of these PowerPoints available to attendees as well. So.
Yeah. Just ask, and I'm more than happy to provide it. So here's some interesting factoids, and look at this. Here's some clusters. Okay, this is HD, and you can see, and I've tried to include different companies, and here's some more. And you can see the mixture here. You've got some Charter, you got a lot of Comcast, and actually there are a lot of Comcast systems. Okay, you got some RCN, you got some Cox. Bottom line is most of the companies will do this. Now, I will also point out that some of these places on the list have it in their franchise agreement. Other places have got their HD channels through settlement agreements that have come up as a result of non-compliance issues. Okay. For example, a couple of places in the Twin Cities got the HD channels because there was some non-compliance issues related to franchise fees, etc. And when the franchising authorities negotiated, they ended up getting an HD channel. But I wanted to let you know that. These are partial lists. I have longer lists. But if you guys know of places that have HD that aren't on this list, please email me because I try to keep the list up to date, and I'll provide them to anybody who wants them. Now, here's another one, EPG. In 5 recent telephone surveys, we found 56% on the average indicated that the EPG was the most frequently used source, and they used it 3 times more than anything else. Okay, what does this tell us about what should be in the franchise agreement? Okay, so this is the kind of thing that you only get when you're actually doing some ascertainments and needs assessment. You have to find it out about your town. And again, here are a list of places where you have EPG on paid on the EPG, available on EPG. An interesting mix of places again. So now I'm going to jump to transfer, and I'll spend a little less time on this, but basically right now we have sort of 3 levels of transfers going on, 3 different ones. We've got the Charter, Time Warner, Bright House. How many people are affected by that? You're either a Charter, Time Warner, or Bright House. I'm just surprised there's no more Time Warner systems in here, actually.
Western New York.
Yeah.
It's Western New York and Maine.
Yeah. And then you've got Suddenlink and Altice. Anybody with Suddenlink? I doubt it, but anybody. Suddenlink and Cablevision. Okay, all right. So to cut to the chase, okay, there are no real substantial requirements for cities when they're going through transfer. If the franchise agreement requires the company to get the approval of the city or town, they're going to submit something called an FCC 394 form. And that form is going to provide certain information. Now, your local franchise agreement may require other information. So when one looks at what's happening in the transfer process, one needs to be aware that if the franchise or license agreement says that they have to get the city's approval, they should be filing a 394. And the city has 120 days from the date they receive the 394 to act. If they don't act within 120 days, it's deemed automatically approved. Okay, important thing. Secondly, there's a 30-day window. 30 days, within 30 days of when the 394 is filed, if the city needs to look at, or the town needs to look at the documentation, and if it is incomplete, or they have questions that make it apparent that it's incomplete, and that includes stuff that should be provided vis-a-vis the franchise agreement, you need to let the company know, because it actually minimally, I'll use the word stops the clock. Some says it restarts the clock, but I won't get into that debate right now, okay? But now, the important thing that I'm going to tell you is this. You've got to look at whether the company is complying with its current license and franchise agreement.
Right.
Because they will give you a document, a resolution or an ordinance for the city to pass. And it's going to say, oh, the city lovingly approves this transfer, and everything is going to be hunky-dory and better in the future. It doesn't make the company, the buyer, obligated to anything that happened under the previous owner. So it washes the slate clean. So if you haven't done any needs assessment, any compliance reviewing, or you simply don't know, you are giving up all your rights, or the city is giving up all its rights with regard to what happened under the previous owner. So minimally, you need to protect that issue, because most places don't do a very thorough job.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
And has that always been, because I'm just asking, has that always been the practice or the rule, what you just said?
Yeah.
So then that means it's possible that some could have that already
Oh, yeah.
in place and we don't know, or I don't know.
Well, and what I typically find is that either the cities don't act, okay, and it's deemed automatically approved, or they act using the document that the cable company gave them
Right.
as a resolution, or the document that shows that the city's approving of the transfer. Minimally, you want to, if you're not going to do any transfer, any due diligence in that 120 days, minimally you need to have a little transfer agreement. It doesn't have to be fancy or extensive, and there's lots of examples out there, okay, that says this buyer assumes all responsibility for compliance, known and unknown, that happened under the watch of the seller.
So if you don't do that and you sign what they give you, what they give you says that you agree that they've been in compliance with the franchise, so.
Right, you have to delete that provision.
Yeah.
So that means if I have both the contracts, that means if I see one on file that says transfer, which I actually do see on the cover, it says Verizon files franchise agreement and it says transfer, that means they have already done something before they signed off on that contract that has to do with what you're talking about.
Well, basically you have two things. You've got the transfer of the franchise, the right to do business, okay? Now, there's also a federal process associated with this. And I'll say two words and I'll let the lawyers talk about that, okay? But essentially, you're going to have something, it's going to be a resolution to approve the transfer of cable vision, blah, 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 to, and usually there are 4 or 5 different names because the company is this owner, the parent is this, and the name of the franchisee is actually something different than the parent. I'm sure you've all seen that, okay? I mean, there are places where Falcon is still on the franchise agreement for charter franchises, to give you an example, and they acquired Falcon 10 years ago, or something like that. So bottom line is, there are things you need to watch out for, if you're just from a community media perspective, with regard to transfers of ownership, okay? And kind of winding that up then, and I'll turn it over to everybody.
Quick question. I have the very resolution that was presented to my town. I told them, don't sign anything, you know? And I'm reading it, and it gives no inkling that it's not going to hold them to the previous. So I should advise my town not to sign this, or to sign a substitute agreement?
Well, it should make explicit that the transferee assumes all of the obligations in the existing franchise in its current form, which they are usually happy to agree to. It's just a matter of making it explicit in the document. And also, as Sue was making this excellent point, delete the clause that they always put in saying we find the transferor to be in compliance with the existing license. You want to remain silent
It's
about
not in
that.
mine, it's not in mine.
I'm going to look down the second page, it's maybe buried in there. I think it's in many of them, yeah. And you can also get them to make verbal commitments in the transfer process, in addition to the fact that they're assuming all of the obligations.
Verbal count?
Yeah, I mean, well, you can question them about their commitment to PEG access and show them you have expectations. You can also do some compliance review and tie that into the transfer criteria, because the transfer criteria are the legal qualifications, and if they're in non-compliance, one of the ways you can evaluate the legal qualifications of a new company is to say, well, how would you deal with this non-compliance? Do you even understand that it may be non-compliance? And that can become a test of one of the transfer criteria, their legal qualifications. So there are ways to use the transfer process in a very meaningful way.
And now we also are 8 years into a 10-year franchise agreement.
Right.
They're in renewal.
So do we still have to sign this and then wait?
Well, and that's actually the last bullet point on this, on my last slide. If you're in an ongoing renewal process at the time of the transfer, it can simplify or complicate the situation, okay? One of the things I would say, and there's a number of places right now that are in administrative law hearing process renewal. There's been preliminary denial, and they also are in a transfer environment. So I think I'm going to stop here. We'll talk about that later on, okay? Let these other guys be able to share their knowledge with you with regard to these matters. But yeah, I know that this brings up a lot of things in people's minds, and we'll try to take that up a little later.
Right, and follow up with us, because it's been, this year shows what a huge issue transfer is. You have the Comcast, Time Warner proposed merger, and it shows how the FCC can make a huge difference, and the Charter Time Warner right now, so it's still a huge and important type of cable proceeding, is the whole transfer process.
I will say that sometimes franchise agreement doesn't give the local government the same rights.
Could you say that again?
Transfer, so it's whether it's a transfer of ownership, a transfer of control. For example, the Time Warner charter doesn't have to be approved by New York City franchises because they gave up their right as part of the franchise negotiation to approve the transfer.
So it's not, to Jim's point, it's not a uniform, universal right of each municipality. So very often it has to be sort of described within the franchise agreement itself, whether or not they've got the ability, and so there's an obligation to have that transfer discussion happen at the local level. So in New York, in the New York instance, the ground being discussed at the Public Service Commission and at the FCC, not at the local level, because many of those local agreements just simply don't have that language. Right.
Before turning the next discussion over to Mike Wassenaar, on that specific point, I want to mention something that Bua Ford also shared with me coming into this workshop in the weeks earlier about the state level, state of Connecticut Public Utility Regulatory Authority, exactly parallel to what Mike was saying for New York. The state is involved in the transfer review process, not the local level franchising authority, and that became, and this is important for states like Connecticut and Rhode Island, where you have a state government oversight model and you don't have the local franchising authority. The state became the vehicle for Frontier, the transferee from AT&T, making multiple commitments to PEG access through the transfer process. Is that what happened in the Connecticut model?
Yep.
Okay.
Still followed up.
So there are opportunities in Connecticut and Rhode Island. This is one of the points that's important to the PEG centers in Connecticut to stay active and monitor the state agency where you can work on these things.
And do we know what the state clock looks like in New York with cable? Do we? Yes, I have not been monitoring that specifically, but that will be. I mean, so for example, in the charter discussions that occurred, the Time Warner merger acquisition transaction, the new charter transaction. The hearings on that took place in September. So there's going to be determinations that can be happening at the state level, separate from the federal process. The shot clock is running on the federal process. There's going to be ex parte discussions now about whether or not the transaction is rejected or accepted with conditions. And that's kind of where a lot of the horse wrangling is going to be occurring at the federal level that may benefit some of our organizations.
I don't know the New York.
Does anybody monitoring this at all? Or, I mean, so I guess that's I think there's an opportunity there within the State Public Service Commission contract Cable Vision.
I'm originally a Brooklyn boy.
Yeah, I
should know.
You get the newsletter every week.
Well, there's been state hearings going on around the state. The PSC has been having hearings, I know that.
But they're ongoing right now. They concluded.
They concluded.
Did they conclude?
They have for all T's.
No, that was.
So I guess I can do some digging on that.
Yeah, that's
for
right.
people too. So.
They may not have actually.
All right, so Mike, do you want to do the,
Well, yeah.
some of the other?
So some of the stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, so Bill's alluded to the fact that there's been like a host of different either proceedings or discussions happening at the federal level that affect our industry, where there's some opportunities specifically to be involved, but then also there's some things for us to be sort of in the area of or be mindful of. I guess the first thing that I want to kind of point to is something that is actually the most recent sort of regulatory discussion, which is something that both NTOA and ACM were a part of with the FCC a week and a half ago now. With the FCC Disability Rights Office, and it was a discussion about the application of closed captioning rules for PEG operations. There's been actually kind of a great deal of concern that people have about this. I want to talk a little bit about the discussion, but then also some things to be thinking about specifically in terms of captioning and both opportunities as well as potential landmines to be thinking about. The discussion came about because of the high degree of confusion that exists within the industry, and also the consternation that happens with disability rights groups across the country who want to have more access to civic information and local government information. And underneath the FCC's captioning rules, which were promulgated in the late 90s, there's a statutory exemption for captioning for PEG operations. If you make less than $3 million in revenue per year per channel, you're exempt under FCC rules from captioning. Now, to show of hands, how many of you fall underneath that exemption? A lot of hands, a lot of people, a lot of hands. I mean, so that's meant practically for most of our operations across the country, I think all of our operations across the country, the FCC has not been an enforcer of any regulatory regime regarding captioning, and they're not interested in changing that rule. And so I just want to make sure that there's been a little bit of study about this.
So that's on the FCC side.
On the FCC side, right. But 25 years ago, George Herbert Walker Bush signed a document called the Americans with Disability Act. It's the reason why we actually have seen sort of the promulgation of a whole host of different architecture in America, and it's because of this sort of need for ramps and equal access for all Americans. It's sort of the heart of the act. One of the key provisions of the act is the responsibility that local government has to the government to be able to provide access, a reasonable accommodation and access for information based upon one's needs. It's pretty clear that local government across America is covered by the Americans with Disability Act. The question ends up being not what the responsibility of PEG providers is to the FCC, but what's the responsibility that local governments have to their citizens under ADA. And it's not the FCC that administers the ADA, it's the Justice Department. And actually, regional representatives of the Justice Department have been doing local government audits in some parts of the country, looking at compliance issues with ADA for local government because of complaints that have occurred not just regarding peg channels, government hearings and the like, but, you know, general services that local governments have not been providing. So as the Justice Department does local audits, one of the things that pops up on a consistent basis is captioning of your local government meetings, because it really ends up being a sort of question about whether or not you're providing equal access to decision making for voters, for taxpayers, and for citizens that are affected by government operations. So one thing that's extremely important, both the TOA and ACM things, is that we make sure that local governments understand their rights and obligations. So there's actually a process to determine whether or not an accommodation under ADA is unreasonable. And it's not waving your hands in the air saying, oh, it costs a lot of money. That's not the process. Or, oh, I got a little bankrupt. Oh, my God. That's not a process. You actually specifically have to do a cost analysis of what it would mean to be able to provide that from a local government perspective. And then you actually need to be making a representation from a leadership of a department or the township regarding whether or not it's an undue financial burden. So it's a question of articulating the need and the responsibility. So I just want to be clear about this. It's not like new sets of rules going about. What we're trying to do is we're trying to help elucidate the process. Our concern is that people panic, local governments panic. They don't understand cost benefit or economic ways to be able to do captioning. And then they would come to a third party peg provider and say, oh, well, we're going to defund you because we need to do captioning. That's a scenario that is, I think, feasible. So what we need to be doing is we need to be providing information about what the rights and responsibilities of local government really are under ADA. And then we need to be building more flexible funding streams, specifically to be able to come up with solutions and lower cost alternatives for particularly small towns. I think for large metropolitan centers with 1 million subscribers, it's hard to make justification that a $500 million operation is to be bankrupted with $20,000 in captioning costs or $30,000 in captioning costs. It's not an unreasonable burden. $30,000 for a $70,000 operation is an unreasonable burden, right? So that's the kind of case that needs to be made, and we need to be. And I think we actually are making friends in the disability community on this issue, because it's important for us to be able to underline the fact that we care about access to information for all Americans. That's our bottom line, our mission, and we need to find ways to do it, as opposed to saying, oh, we care about money first, and then we can't be bothered to put our head in the sand. So I think that's just something to kind of outline exactly what the approach is. Go ahead.
Is this something that
And then give your name to everybody so that everyone knows who you are.
Peter Marks, Wellesley Public Media?
Yeah.
Is this something that should be going in the franchise renewal? Is this an area for discussion?
It is. So for example, if you need to have live meeting coverage and you need more labor support. Let's say you need $100 an hour, $120 an hour for live captioning systems. That's a material need to be able to meet the needs of your residents. Right? So let's say you're doing 5 meetings a week. I don't know what it would be, or whatever it would be. Let's say that's being like 300 hours of meetings a year. 300 meetings a year at $100 to $150 an hour is a substantial amount of support that actually could have a material benefit to your community. That's actually something you can document, especially if you have, you know what the demographics of your community are. You have elderly populations that have greater need for captioning. You may have non-English speakers who have need and desire for captioning. You may have significant deaf and hard of hearing populations. I know it's the case actually for a number of communities in New England where there are schools of the deaf. And then you have populations that continue to live in those communities after they went to school there. That's all things that you can document and then argue for in terms of like material support because of the labor cost. The labor cost is the issue. But yeah.
Mike, you might want to bring up the dilemma with regard to money over and above the 5% and the issue of how we use the money. exactly was in play, just to say.
Right, so as a result of a host of different rulemakings that have occurred over the years, there are greater strictures upon money that can be given to a local community above the 5% franchise fee. I'm not going to go really deep into the regulatory history on this. That does not necessarily mean that there can't be voluntary support that corporation agrees to. You'll often hear corporations say something like, "Oh, our hands are tied. The federal government won't allow us to do this."
But generally, if it's for capital, that's not counted towards the 5% cap.
That is correct. So like under the 1984 Cable Act, any support above and beyond the 5% franchise fee that comes in the form of a PEG grant has to be capital. So that ends up being a restriction that I think a lot of people think is outmoded. We're actually working hard to try to fix that, so there's more flexibility to be able to have it used for any paying purpose. But that's something to be concerned about specifically when you're talking about trying to extend services to communities in need. Unless you've got like PEG robots, capital doesn't do you any good. Yeah, you need for services. So I think that ends up being the argument that we're trying to make at the federal level on this issue as well.
And Mike, at that meeting at the FCC, the roundtable on closed captioning, who was there from federal agencies other than FCC? It was the Department of Justice.
Department of Justice. So there's actually I shared the presentation that was made from the Department of Justice National Access, and actually we'll make that available on our website.
It's
currently on the FCC's website. If you go to the FCC.gov and to events, you can actually see the live stream of the presentations that occurred there. And there's actually a very, very persuasive argument that Claude Stout from Telecommunications for the Deaf made about why it's important for all Americans to be able to get access to PEG programming. I mean, frankly, I want to use that testimony as often as I can because it is a powerful advocate about the really empowering nature of civic programming.
Was your sense that they were there in a collaborative spirit to find reasonable measures, or were they there in the spirit of saying, we want to enforce the law?
They do not understand our industry.
Right. They don't.
So, I mean, I would say the FCC doesn't understand our industry. And if the FCC doesn't understand our industry, how do you think justice for it? So justice is very interested in sort of finding out what reality is.
Right.
You know, and I think, but it's quite clear that they wanted, I mean, under the Obama administration, they want to make sure that local governments are abiding by their obligations for ACM.
Right.
I mean, so they want to work collaboratively.
Right.
They want to make sure, and they also want to make sure people follow the letter of the law if they're describing an unburden.
Right.
I think that's the most interesting thing about this bill, is that, you know, I've heard from a lot of people that, oh, well, we'll be bankrupted or this will be too much cost or something like that. You actually need to be doing a cost-benefit analysis of this. And then you actually need to be documenting what those vendor costs are. And then you need to actually be talking about what the effect is on local government, really. And then it has to be at the local government level, it's not at the PEG level. So I think this ends up being sort of the partnership that we need to be thinking about as we're working with our local government electives, with liaisons in the industry. So
and finding technology with the least cost closed captioning.
So let me give you an example. I mean, so there are also vendors in this who are very interested in trying to expand their services to more people, which is understandable. But there's also techniques that are being used now that are driving costs down. So for example, a vendor reached out to me to talk about sort of the process called shadow speaking, where what you're doing is you have a voice capture of somebody talking like this, describing right? And then you've got a transcript then that is then cleaned up and then brought back in.
Right, that's what stenographers will do in a...
Correct, and you're actually seeing the expansion of, like, you know, court reporters, court reporting functions back into this industry as well. So if local government is currently, for example, there's some examples of local government live signing at events. It's cheaper to do captioning on a per hour basis than it is to do live signing. So there's actually surprise opportunities to be expanding access to information and saving local governments money if we can figure out how to negotiate the process. So,
I'd say my sense is that the Disability Rights Office, FCC, is interested in trying to work with us to find some kind of solution and not say, you've got to do it. One of the suggestions that was made, it was on the record or conversation afterwards, is, well, how about using college students or community college students to, on a volunteer basis, to come in and do captioning. And Alan Bouchon from Salem, Oregon said, gee, that's a great idea, but the problem I have is what do you do when schools are on vacation or on break, and how does that work? And the woman he was talking to said, oh, she hadn't thought of that, but to try to find some kind of voice. I think they were interested in kind of making suggestions, and when she said this, gee, that seemed like a good idea. Well, Alan said, gee, that's a good idea, but she understood the but.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Mike, can I ask you one other federal level question about another subject, federal subject?
Please.
And then we'll turn it over to Jim. The FCC proceeding, a lot of people are talking about this, on how to treat internet protocol video streaming if the cable company says, well, I'll just sell this as a video stream on a national footprint to everybody over the
Are you talking about the MVP?
over the top.
So
instead of through a cable subscription, then I don't have to pay license fees, peg fees, the whole cord cutting phenomenon was at the FCC this year.
So
and what should we be doing if we do face decreased franchise fees from the younger generation, cord cutting and Apple TV and Google TV? What can we do to offset that through other telecommunications?
So I'll take the first part of the question. That's the easier one,
right?
It's not the political.
Okay.
There's a political answer that I want to get to the second part of the question.
It's kind of a good news, bad news.
So I want to thank people in the room who participated in this proceeding. I heard from our members late last year that they're very concerned about what could be coming forward from the FCC regarding the multi-channel video proceeding, which was an attempt by the chairman's office to try to spur competition for cable companies, to actually provide some benefits to streaming services, to do linear channels, to be in competition with the cable, to the hardwired cable industry. And the rulemaking itself had some good news, bad news for us. It was actually good in some respects because the conclusion that it came to was that if you go to an internet protocol and you own the facility that is doing that cable service, IP cable is cable. Because there are a number of companies that have been making the argument that, well, if it's IP, it's not cable, it's special. Some other flavor products that doesn't fit in it.
Like an information perspective.
Correct. So tentatively, the FCC agreed with our conclusion and conclusion of our industry that is a cable service. However, they ended up, they also came up with a conclusion that a cable company could provide a linear service on top of broadband, and it wouldn't be a cable service, meaning they'd sell two packages, one that would be a franchise product and one that would be like an unfranchised product. And we thought that was like a way to sort of open up a hole to drive a bus basically through. And so I want to thank you all for participating in those proceedings, for your comments that occurred over the course of this fall. I think they did make a difference. And it wasn't just us, it was also primarily, I think, Apple and other equipment, other providers that want to get into the market basically said, thanks, but no thanks, we just don't need your assistance on this issue. So the rulemaking is generally conceived to be dead at this point.
Or in remission.
Or in remission, if we can use a different metaphor. The chairman conceded this because he couldn't get the necessary votes on the commission to be able to move the rulemaking forward. That doesn't mean that the issue goes away. In some respects, the issue ends up being sort of still in limbo. And we're going to see companies putting forward either skinny bundles, thinner bundles, or bundles that are riding on top of internet services. And so the question ends up being, we have to keep inserting, is how exactly does localism fit within that technology? I'm trying to figure this out right now with Comcast as they're looking at their stream service. They are going to be providing a skinny bundle that will be part of their, they've said now that it won't be riding on top of their data product, it'll be a cable product.
Like a Title VI cable.
It'll be a Title VI cable product. It'll be cheaper than their basic cable product. It's still not clear to me that they're doing peg channel insertion. Mike Lynch from the city of Boston said that they were going to be doing that. They've launched the product in Chicago. I'm not sure. I haven't gotten a definitive answer on that. But theoretically, Comcast will be treating that as a cable product because they don't want it to subject to net neutrality provisions. So here's the thing that's curious about this. I look at what Comcast is doing with the stream product, and it's not clear to me that they want to be subject to those net neutrality provisions. And other providers, I think, have a similar reaction. So I don't think that they want to stop controlling what goes into people's TVs. I think they want to continue to control. So so the bigger battle, I think, for our industry at this point is to find common cause with other organizations that understand the necessity for payment and rent for use of public services, for use of public property, and then people who are concerned about the death of localism, the lack of diversity in our media stream, death of local journalism, and these are sort of areas of common cause we need to find ways to be able to make a political case. Perhaps probably on a state-by-state basis, rather than, I don't think there's going to be a federal solution on this, rather than
Not with this Congress.
I can't predict the future Congress that actually works.
Right.
And I think that's sort of just the political reality that we need to be facing. So I think that means sort of administrative measures,
Right.
shorter measures that can be attached to things, and sort of a very different type of strategy that we're looking at. And we may end up having to have state models that are trying to solve this, where you have, and we may actually have to be doing we actually may have to learn something from the cable industry and start doing state work.
Right. I think that's where the groundwork is to go.
Right.
Well, could you wrap it up? Because we have to leave some time for Jim Forward, our next panel. And then we'll try to leave some more time.
And then we want me to take on Jim.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Senator Mike mentioned it was to make common cause with one of the outfits, and the one that's been most significant to us recently is Common Cause, which is an organization founded 30, 40 years ago by John Gardner, who was a Republican back when Republicans believed in, or some Republicans believed in government the government's finding solution. And Common Cause, I think of all the public interest organizations, DC is the one that's most focused on localism, and they joined with us on opposing the AT&T.
Was Michael Kopp's been involved with that?
Michael Kopp's
because he
former...
helped Common Cause start a media democracy group now.
You know, Michael Kopp's is a former FCC commissioner who was always very receptive to our concerns, and is now I forget what his title is, but he does kind of communications, public policy with them, and he's a very articulate, passionate advocate who believes in us and believes in Common Cause. Part of the problem we've had on a lot of other issues, some of the mergers and things like the OTT issue is a lot of the public interest community and agree with cable operators. Gee, franchising is a barrier. Let's get rid of it so we can have competition and everybody will be able to get all these services in a better way and without recognizing that we're using public rights of way by destroying the kind of structure we have. You're going to destroy some protections for localism. When we talked about the OTT thing, it was kind of good and it was bad news because
Does everyone know what OTT is? It's just the
It's
weird
over.
acronym for this internet delivery that might not be cable under that theory.
Yeah, it's over the top. It's service that's delivered over the public internet. The public internet is not internet protocol. This is the public internet, and that's something that we're probably not going to ever be able to get regulation of, and we're probably not going to be able to get franchise fees over things that travel over the public internet. Because it's somewhat sacrosanct. That's what's involved with the net neutrality rule by the FCC and by the court, or by the court of appeal. But the reason that the people delivering OTT wanted to be able to consider it a multi-channel video program delivery provider is they would have access to programming that's otherwise not available to them. So it gives them the right to carry the broadcast channels. It gives them copyright protections that they otherwise might not have. So that was their interest there. The cable company's interest, obviously, is they want to keep these competitors off that aren't paying them. So that's kind of the distinction. So on the rulemaking, on the multi-channel MVPD versus OTT, we were on the same side as the cable operators because we wanted to make sure that these other providers are subject to the same kind of restrictions that the cable operators have. Once that goes away, we will find the cable operators quickly turning around and saying, okay, they don't have to provide this, therefore we don't have to provide that, or we'll figure out how we can become over the top and avoid these obligations. So then you got problems talking about, well, if things are split, maybe some of it's MVPD, some of it's OTT, and you're cutting the basis on which you collect franchise fees substantially. So that's a threat. So right now, that's not going anywhere. I think the chairman was probably surprised when he pushed this, that he got as much pushback as he did, particularly the pushback from the Googles and a lot of the independent programmers. The folks he thought that were being providing benefit to didn't really want this. Unfortunately, while we may have a temporary victory, that's not going to prevent the cable operators on kind of a case-by-case basis from trying to take advantage of the kind of arguments they're saying and say, well, we don't have to pay franchise fees on this, so we're going to be moving this onto a different platform. What Comcast is talking about doing, while originally cable service, and they may change their tune very shortly. We saw when we had the ration statewide franchising that started in 2007 and 2008, which was pushed by AT&T. And they got statewide franchising in 20-some states. It was the states where AT&T had their telephone platform. When these bills were proposed, they were opposed by the cable operators. And our thought was, well, they're opposed by cable operators now. So once the bills get traction in the next session of the state legislature, when the cable companies get cut in on the same kind of deal, they will then be supporting this legislation. And that's what happened. It happened in Virginia, it happened in Texas, it happened in Illinois, it happened in California. California, you have some level of statewide franchising in New England, but what you have is nothing like what the rest of the country has when you go to statewide franchising. Statewide franchising, it pretty much gets rid of most of the obligations we think of. The two best states, or least bad states, are Illinois and California, both of which took a lot of effort with PEC people, local government people.
Well, two of our states with state franchising don't even have renewals. They have Rhode Island and Connecticut. Right. All the states with local franchising have periodic renewals. But 2 out of our 3 with state franchising don't even have renewals. So state does go against those good, valuable, meaningful.
Yeah, and the only really exception is the process that happens for licensing in Vermont.
Right, Vermont has meaningful renewals, even though it has state. Right.
Oh, yes.
Which we should mention.
Since we're getting near the end, I'm in a situation where it's either can simplify or complicate my situation. Marion area, ACM New York, and Putnam Valley, New York is 8 years into our 10-year contract, and we have a Altice transfer process too. So technically, Altice. Thank you, Altice. So technically, we're in a 36-month window. What advice could you give my municipality? Is there something that we have to do to initiate that renegotiation process? And we lost telephony and internet in our last gross receipts definition.
I mean, if the city or the town is commenced a renewal process, has started to do something with regard to the renewal proceeding, then it's one, and now you're into a transfer situation. I think how far you're into it, kind of, there's one answer to the question.
We didn't start.
They haven't even started. So they've done nothing on renewal at all.
No.
It's in the 30, it's in the window, and now they're in transfer.
Yeah.
They have to, I just done one
Sure.
bright line thing. In the Cable Act, in my materials, I have primary materials, including a copy of the renewal statute. And it says in that renewal statute, the local franchising authority should initiate a public ascertainment proceeding. That's the proceeding which is the broad umbrella over all the different fact-finding and ascertainment tasks that Sue was describing. Usually it takes the form of a public hearing, give notice. So have a public ascertainment proceeding. That sends a signal to the cable company, we're alive and kicking, we're ascertaining. And we're gathering public comment and testimony, which will legitimate our negotiations, without which it just looks like, oh, here's some commission or a selectman who are negotiating, but it's not legitimated and strengthened without that public proceeding, which is what I'm referring to as the ascertainment proceeding. If you're early enough, you're supposed to hold that hearing within 6 months of the cable company's commencement letter. Under the cable companies always send a letter. It may be buried in town hall somewhere, but I've never seen a renewal without one out of it. They send the statute says they shall send a notice that the town is in the 36-month window. So there's a notice letter buried somewhere in town hall, most likely. And the statute says that first public ascertainment proceeding should be within 6 months of the receipt of that letter. By doing that, you reserve your formal process rights.
So if we missed it,
Well, if you missed it, you can still do informal negotiation.
But you don't have to start the hearing within that, you just have to start the process. You have to,
send a letter.
within the 6 month, basically say, we're going to be starting a process to do it. So
Right.
You don't have to actually.
The starting of the process, the initiation of the public proceeding does not have to be a hearing, but it doesn't hurt to make that commencement take the form of a hearing, because then you've killed 2 birds with 1 stone. One, you met your requirement to initiate within 6 months of the commencement letter or to initiate an ascertainment proceeding, but you've also disposed of the need. Everyone knows you've had a hearing. It also puts the public on notice, so no one can come back later and say, what, renewal? We didn't know. If you have that hearing early, everyone is on notice, especially if you do newspaper. So there are a lot of things you should be doing.
Well, the key here is though, if your franchise agreement gives the city the right to approve the transfer, and if the town has received the FCC 394, which is an easy, you can look at your franchise agreement, but you can also look and try, because that 394 will have come in the last 3 months with regard to a Cablevision LTC procedure.
This is on the transfer side.
Yeah, well, where I'm going here, okay, is if you got a 394, the key with regard, and nothing's been done at all with regard to renewal, the key thing with regard to that transfer agreement is to make sure that there is a transfer agreement attached to the resolution approving the transfer that basically preserves all the city's rights with regard to the franchise renewal process, and also makes it very clear that the city is not saying the company has complied with the terms and conditions of the existing franchise, okay, and that the buyer is responsible for anything that occurred under the seller's watch. If you do nothing but that, you're preserving rights to get the renewal process back on track when you haven't done anything in that window of time. And you don't even see it, the letter has gone from the town to the cable company saying, oh, gee, we got your letter requesting renewal, and we're acknowledging that, and we're going to commence a process. They don't have to say what type of process. So minimally, those sorts of things with regard to the transfer, in your situation, can preserve some rights. Doing what Bill said, fantastic. I'm not sure what the politics are mine to turn that around that quickly, but doing what I'm suggesting with regard to the transfer could be a pretty easy thing.
Although you can do a joint transfer renewal when they're overlapping. We just did that in a Maine community that's going through a charter Time Warner that's in the window. You just have 2 agenda items. If you're taking up the transfer, also, step 2, renewal ascertainment, because as Jim was saying, ascertainment can be in almost any form. It doesn't have to be a formal public hearing. It can just be, is it a city council or?
Yeah, it's a town board. So we
Town
should do a
board.
public hearing also for the
Yeah, you
transfer.
can have both as agenda items, transfer and
Yeah.
renewal, so you have a record of doing some ascertainment.
You just need to be real clear that if you're going to do that, you've got to really watch what you're doing so that this company doesn't presume they're getting the franchise agreement at the same time.
Oh,
Okay, but I'm saying,
Yeah.
you have to be careful with that one, because sometimes the town won't know that.
that would be bad.
That would be really bad. So that's why I'm bringing it up, okay?
You're
Because
right.
it is
They
a
might
tough-
not know what they're voting on.
Right,
You
so-
have to clearly separate
Yeah.
them. Transfer
Okay.
in this box, and then the renewal is not a vote on the renewal. It's just an ascertainment is identifying your needs. You just start gathering testimony to identify needs. Let me say one other
Compliance,
thing.
for instance.
Let me say one other thing about the public hearing aspect
Okay.
of ascertainment. It's a huge opportunity to turn a renewal around. If it's kind of been dormant and sleepy, which tends to happen, because don't forget, the Cable Act says you can start renewal 3 years early. So a lot of town officials think, 3 years, that's a million years from now. I don't have to do that much. That's not true, because it takes, but as soon as you have that hearing, psychologically, by having the good people, by doing outreach, and having someone from the Girl Scouts come and say how we had our show on last month, and then the superintendent of schools, and then a state legislature. If you have 9 or 10 people give good testimony at a public hearing, that alone will change the psychology of renewal negotiations. It's a huge opportunity, that public ascertainment public hearing. It's not just a formality or a procedure, because the person who comes from the cable company, they see with their own eyes and remember the testimony. And then throughout the whole rest of the renewal process, that's often their first impression and it's a lasting impression. So the design of that public hearing in an appropriate way to have great testimony can make a huge difference. So I say give that a lot of attention.
Just
Even if it's late, you
quick
can
question,
still
does
do a lot.
the transfer have to happen within a certain time
We
frame?
got 120 days.
120 days, so that's gonna happen.
394
Right.
submitted.
So we could maybe do the renewal at the same time if we can get
Okay,
our.
but remember, I'm really picky about precision and language here, because you're not doing the renewal, okay? You're doing a hearing that commences an ascertainment process. That's two
Oh, yeah.
different things.
Right.
I'm just trying to be real careful about what we're.
You're doing
Right, but
renewal
you're doing franchising
ascertainment.
negotiation.
Right. Question?
Yeah, a couple of things. One,
And can you go,
Thank you.
I'm Jim Cunningham, Town of Lincoln, Mass.
Right.
When we did our renewal, we had 1%.
Did you say Lincoln?
Lincoln.
Okay. So good.
So we had 1% for a number of years. I said, yeah, we want to jack that up. Well, it was really easy because we just said, okay, we're now at 3.5%. He said, it's easy. We're still cheaper than our surrounding towns. Comcast, no problem. You know, simple. Plus, good ascertainment. We
For
get
the-
good business.
For the franchise fee.
For the franchise fee amount, plus, you know, at least another percent equivalent for capital.
Right.
So that was just always, if you don't want an argument, keep it just below your surrounding towns. And you just say, you raise it, we're cheaper than the other towns.
Right, we're a very moderate package. That carries a lot of weight as an argument in renewal negotiations if you are moderate relative to surrounding counties. Let's just, Jim, did you have more on this? Because this is like one of the, what you were discussing as we got into this, is one of the overarching regulatory things, the whole, that internet, that FCC proceeding. I just don't want to cut you
That's
off.
probably all I had on that. And I know one issue that people have is, can we include internet revenues as part of the basic, we collect franchise fees on there, Brand X decision might pass that.
Right. Well, can I ask you a related question on internet revenues?
Yeah. I can tell you how you can get revenue.
Well, I want to know is how can we, what about telecommunications revenues?
Okay.
Because those have historically been easier than internet revenues, but often not pursued because of state law.
The real issue is state law. There's a pending court case that is very significant. It involves the city of Eugene, Oregon. Oregon allows cities to charge rights-of-way fees. Eugene has a right-of-way fee that they're charging, and that includes percentage of all revenues. It's not divided between cable and internet, so they're collecting on the internet revenues. Comcast is appealing that in court, saying, no, under the Cable Act, you can only charge us on cable services. Therefore, this tax on rights of way, fee on right of way, which they call a tax, doesn't apply to us. That's an important court case. I know the Tower has filed a friend of the court brief there. The problem is, if that is successful, I think there's a good chance it will be
Comcast
successful.
is successful.
No, I'm sorry, if Eugene is successful,
Eugene is successful.
and then Comcast loses, that's fine, except lots of luck getting a state legislation to allow you to impose any kind of fee which will be characterized as a tax.
And why is that? Because you think
Oh.
they'll see it as a tax and an increased financial bite on the consumer. Is that what the political issue is, do you
Yeah.
think, in the legislatures, in
Yeah.
addition to the lobbyists and their
Yeah, and the whole no new tax thing, kicks in,
Right.
plus the fact.
Can I briefly mention my idea on how to do this on a state level, my stabilization fee idea? I have a proposal.
Proposal on
How to get,
legislate.
yes, on how to get telecommunications fees legislation that refutes the argument that it's like a new tax. The telecommunications fee would only kick in to the extent that the cable license fees go down to offset the cord cutting. And therefore, no one could say your telecommunications fee is causing a net burden on the consumer. It's stabilizing the loss a stabilization fee, and the other argument for it, in addition to why should we slash PEG access in municipal budgets due to cord cutting, is this. Why not stabilize the fees now? Because actually, the cord cutting is the result of a technology that is using the public way more, not less,
So,
than in the past.
I mean, I think I put you.
I just throw that out
Right.
for as an idea.
So-
I'm not, we have to like break.
So, that's a solution that needs a political constituency.
Right.
You don't have a constituency for it right now.
That's
Very often municipalities won't even party.
You guys are my.
So we need to be building a constituency that fights for it.
Right.
Cities often don't. I'm just telling you that. So I mean, I think it's going to be very much on a state by state basis.
Right.
Because some states you couldn't even begin to have that conversation.
Right.
Other states would be much easier to have that conversation, especially if you're looking at specific benefits that the public can see that are related to that fee. You know, so you can very easily see digital literacy initiatives, for example, being supported by a telecommunications fee. That's right. Or
Kathy, oh, sorry.
Just really quickly to follow up on that FCC hearing, which thank you very much for setting that up. I'm from the town of Brattleboro, Vermont, and we do have a higher than average deaf and hard of hearing population due to the existence of the Austin School, which is a residential school for 30 years, which recently closed, but still. And so we are really interested in captioning, and our select board is paying to ASL caption, ASL interpret their live meetings, so they are spending something. I watched that 4-hour hearing. Okay.
God bless you.
Yeah. I learned something to that. But what was missing for me was actual costs. You know, I kept going through, and people were talking about YouTube and editing YouTube, and then there were vendors that were mentioning websites, but I just felt like there weren't enough figures there for somebody like me to say, oh, I'm going to go chase that.
So, Natola and ACM will be publishing a vendor list for live caption choices that'll be available to our members within the month. We want to be able to give you best options to be able to price things out if you're looking at live captioning options. You probably also are looking at some capital expense that's nominal.
There's some kind of encoder.
Yeah, so it'd probably be like an encoder that's connected to an internet line, basically. So that's maybe like a $2,000 or $3,000 one-time cost, separate from the ongoing cost of captioning. So we want to be able to provide that for you. ACM and Natola will be publishing that within a month. And I don't know, I think from our conversation, you talked about the ASL cost, it's much more highly skilled than live captioning is. And the cost of live ASL is actually greater. So in that instance, I think you might be seeing reduced governmental costs for your local township and greater benefit. So I just think that there's a possibility for that, like a double digit.
Totally agree. I just need some numbers.
Got it. Yeah.
And for everybody in the room, because I can see people getting antsy, there's another session this afternoon at 3:30, in which most of us are going to be there. So if you've got questions you couldn't get answered here, please show up there, because I know we all do.
Are you talking about, yes, the lawyers and consultants?
Yeah.